Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Nice to see everybody. And welcome back to Alan and welcome to Morris. So we're starting a little bit earlier this morning because there's a preschool graduation going on at 10. My little guy is graduating too, so I have double reason to be there. And if you would have seen the emails, we have kind of reframed what we're studying about, because in essence, even though we are reading mainly Midrash, this is not really a Midrash class. This is really a class at the moment that's about the early great rabbis who were the founding fathers of Rabbinic Judaism. And really it was, as I wrote in my email, it is interesting. You can almost look at them the way you would look at the founding fathers of this country, where each one has their role and their place and their each one has their character, their unique character they bring, and they help shape the whole nation. And so it's the same with the founding fathers of Rabbinic Judaism, right? Not Judaism. You read the Torah for the founders of Judaism, but Rabbinic Judaism, these are the people who did it. I call them the fathers, but their wives were often also just as important in a lot of what happened. And there's just like with the founding fathers of this country and their interaction with each other and all the politics and their beliefs and their competitions, and through all of that, the country emerged. Same thing with this. A lot of these rabbis were in competition, and hundreds of years later, when the Talmud is written down, you have the recordings of these early rabbis, and this rabbi said so and so, and this rabbi had so and so, and so it became so important that what they were arguing about became the foundation of all future Jewish arguments regarding matters of Jewish custom and Jewish tradition and Jewish life. They're also really important to the conservative movement, to the conservative movement's vision of Judaism, because for conservative Jews, the early rabbis of conservative Judaism felt that they were in the midst of a unique time trying to create something new in Judaism, and they weren't just continuing, but they were bold innovators, just the way these early founding fathers were bold innovators. But the early, they were grappling with, in the midst of destruction, the temple is destroyed. How do I save Judaism? How do I balance tradition? And how do I balance trying to bring in new things, right, with the Judaism, make it survive without a temple? And this is exactly what conservative rabbis felt. They wanted to preserve the tradition in a way they felt Reform rabbis weren't as interested in, but they also wanted to make it fit a new time and the needs of the moment. So all of these early rabbis are really the inspiration. They had pretty, what we call in the Jewish world, they had broad shoulders, right? They were willing to do things that change things in a pretty dramatic way. In our world, we would say that the Orthodox rabbis rarely are willing to change something in a very profound way. They feel that Jewish law is like a stream, and so you can divert the stream, while conservative rabbis feel you can go backwards to where there was a fork in the stream and go one way instead of the other way. And so they see themselves as having as broad shoulders with much authority as some of these early rabbis. And so I think that these rabbis are good for us to study in general as Jews, but also in the context of our synagogue being a conservative synagogue, and the balance of tradition and change, which has really been part of the movement. And today we're going to wrap up Rabbi Akiva. And so the first class we had of Rabbi Akiva, you don't have to have gone to any of the other classes to really be part of this one, but the first class of Rabbi Akiva, we really studied Rabbi Akiva as innovator who started studying at 40 years old and was able to acquire so much information and become one of the most learned rabbis of his time. And then he started 40 years old and got his wife's hand, and she was the daughter of the richest guy in town. And eventually she said, go and study. And he left for many, many years and came back with thousands of students. And his wife, the students didn't know she was his wife. And they tried to get his wife to go away because they thought she looked shabby. And he said, if it wasn't for her, none of what we have would we have. And then father-in-law gave them all his money because he realized how great his son-in-law was, and kind of fairy tale ending. But then so it's a story of someone who was incredible genius and came up with nothing. But then we also had last time we looked at stories of how profound he was as a spiritual rabbi. Of the famous story of the four rabbis who go to the Pardes, with the heavenly orchard, and engage in some kind of mystical path. One went crazy, the other died, the other became a heretic, and only Rabbi Akiva came back to live the tale of the tale. And so Rabbi Akiva is known to have that kind of focus and ability of spiritual matters too. And the amazing story of Rabbi Akiva that he was once traveling, we read this last time, and he had with him a rooster and a donkey and a candle, and he tried to get lodging one night, and they said, sorry, no more lodging. And he said, well, this too is for the good. And then he went to go to sleep in a nearby field, and suddenly his donkey got scared and ran away, and then his rooster, he said, this too is for the good. And then his rooster got eaten by a fox, and this too is for the good. And the wind came and blew out his candle. And he said, well, okay, this too is for the good. And that night the Romans came and pillaged everything. And because he didn't have a rooster or a donkey or a candle, he was okay. Not many can live with that way, but that's also part of his heritage. And today we're going to be looking at legacy. And today we're going to be looking at his overall legacy and studying the story of his passing, which is really in many ways a story of the story of all of our early rabbis, and maybe we know best because we read it at Yom Kippur, and it's been part of things for a long time. So
Rabbi, I have a question.
go ahead, go for it.
Did he and his wife have children?
They did, yeah. Yeah, he and his wife had children. It's one of the stories we didn't read, but it also shows the other side of Rabbi Akiva, where the story that Rabbi Akiva would only finish studying early 2 days of the year. And that's how busy he was in his study and how unavailable he was at home. And there's a story that when his son was very ill and dying, he didn't go to the deathbed until the last moment. Because he was studying, he was so engaged in study, and he said, this is where I can help him by studying and giving my merit to his healing and not by bathing. So that story always strikes me in a peculiar, yeah. They had children, but none of his children became great rabbis as far as I can tell. So we are going to we're going to read a few, and we're going to start on page 237. And we have Alan back. So we have.
Okay.
When did you get back, Alan? Last night.
No, Tuesday night.
Tuesday night.
So I'm kind of getting into the swing of things.
That's interesting.
Okay, so where do we start?
So we're going to do 171. It's not the most uplifting
Okay.
story, but we'll do it. Yeah.
It happened that the tyrant Rufus asked Rabbi Akiva, why does the Holy One so hate us that he wrote, but Esau, I hate. Rabbi Akiva said, tomorrow I will give you an answer. In the morning, Rufus asked Rabbi Akiva, what did you dream last night? And what did you see in your dream? Rabbi Akiva said, in my dream, I saw two dogs, one named Rufus and the other named Rufina. Angered, Rufus said, you call your dogs by names no other than mine and my wife's. You deserve death for an offense against the government. You know what? I think someone else, would you mind picking up?
So Ingrid, Rufus said, you call your dogs by their names no other than mine and my wife's. You deserve death for an offense against the government. Rabbi Akiva, but how did you differ from dogs? You eat and drink, and they eat and drink. You procreate and they procreate. You die and they die. You are angry because I called them by your name. Now consider, it is the Holy One who was stretched out to the heavens and established the earth. It is he who consigns to death and restores to life. Yet you take a block of wood, which does nothing, and call it God by his name. Does it not stand to reason that he should be angry with you? Hence, but Esau I hate.
An intense story. How do you see Rabbi Akiva in this story? Yeah, has a severe side, right? He's willing to go up against the Roman governor and risk a lot. Anybody else want to make any comment on Rabbi Akiva in this story? Let's continue because I want to get to 174. And the others. Morris, you mind reading 174 also?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Our masters related the following story. When Rabbi Akiva was confined in prison and Rabbi Joshua, the grits maker, served him, only a limited amount of water was brought into him every day. One day, Rabbi Yoshia was stopped by the keeper of the prison, who asked him, why is your water today above the set limit? Do you perhaps require that much to breach the prison walls? At this, the keeper poured out half of the water and left the other half. When Rabbi Yeshua, delayed by the encounter, finally came in to Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva said, Joshua, do you not know that I am an old man and that my life depends on yours? Why are you so late? After Rabbi Yeshua told him all that had happened, Rabbi Akiva said, give me some water to wash my hands. Rabbi Yoshua replied, the water I brought will not suffice for drinking. How can it also suffice for washing your hands for the meal? Rabbi Akiva, but what else am I to do? I would rather starve myself to death than disregard the opinion of my colleagues.
If you go to number 6 below, it says, you ruled that before meal, one's hands must be washed. So use the little water he had instead of to eat, to drink.
It is related that he tasted nothing until Rabbi Yeshua managed to bring him more water with which to wash his hands. When the sages heard of the incident, they remarked, if he is so scrupulous in his old age, how much more so must he have been in his youth? And if he behaves thus in prison, how much more scrupulous must he behave or be in his own home?
What do you think?
Very scrupulous guy.
Very scrupulous guy, because the good old stubborn Jewish freak in us.
Was this before or after the rabbis created the rule that we're supposed to do whatever we can to save a life? It seems like, drinking some water before washing your hands, choosing to drink some water over washing your hands is, to save a life.
Yeah, it's true. It says, if to save your own life, you should, if you have to, you would eat pork, you do whatever, needs to do. What's the point? What do you think the point is of the story is making, or the Rabbi Akiva's stance?
Well, that he wanted to follow the law, more than to save his life.
Yeah. But in some ways, it's even more, right? This is at the point where there's disagreements about what the law actually is. So this is like, this is the opinion of his colleagues. At this point, washing your hands isn't, it's not from Sinai, right? But he's more concerned with doing that and thinking of his own needs.
Well, he was a teacher and a leader, and he must have felt he had to set the example.
Beautiful. Yeah.
I don't think Rabbi Akiva feels that he is at the point of death yet. And
Yeah.
that's why he chooses to wash his hands and follow the law. If he were at the point of death and had to make that choice, I think he would choose to drink the water to save his life. But I don't think in this particular example, he feels that he is at the verge of death yet. And so he still has the liberty and the life enough to follow the law.
So if you think about all the Jews who heard this story, in the hundreds of years after this, and what they were facing, this is a pretty powerful example of, sets a pretty powerful precedent for how to behave and how to act.
I considering I am now back from my travels,
Yeah,
we went to so many museums which contain so much information about so much pressure on the Jewish communities to convert or to change who they were. And I guess if at least some portion of them remembered Rabbi Akiva and his example.
yeah. So
I
go ahead.
thank you. I would just like to press Alan's earlier question, because I really don't understand if the rule that we have about saving the life, pikuach nefesh. Now, when that became articulated, and we have here a story. I mean, Akiva is living in the 2nd century, I think, and I don't know when this story was first told, and it's whether to what extent it may be historical or not. But if we understand that there was this rule, then if we take his statement literally, then Nancy's statement that that he wouldn't really starve himself to death might be true, but he actually says that's what he would do. So I almost wanted to take that as a kind of parody to say they pushed it too far. I don't know, but it's such a mixture of things. When that rule became explicit, and whether Akiva was alive then, if we know, maybe it's not known.
All we know is that this story has the authority of a Tanaitic source, because it's a story of 2 Tanaim, of the 2 earliest rabbis. So it's going to have the highest authority, except for a Torah verse. But we've always kind of existed, haven't we, in the tension between don't, even though we have these rules of you can break the law except in these 3 ways, rather than die. We've always existed in the tension of Jews who have been willing to, sacrifice their lives, or at least their well-being, for the tradition, and I mean, this is a very severe side of Rabbinic Judaism, but it's been there since the beginning, and I was thinking, as I was preparing for this class, even among the ultra-Orthodox now, you see this kind of austerity and severity a little bit, and the sense of preserve, we've always been a tradition that's honors life, and that, we think of Hillel, and that's, kind of try and just make do with what you have and celebrate life. There's also been a severity in the face of oppression. We don't stand down, and that we there are some values that are higher than almost anything, and Jews have always been willing to stand up for those values rather than so where exactly the limit is and where the value is, halachically, we do have it clear, but in the face of martyrdom, you have people who, the line hasn't always been as firm as the halacha makes it out to be in some ways. But this is this kind of, this has been part of our survival as a people for 2,000 years of exile. Is, when people have pushed us into the corner, we've said, okay, well, we're not giving in.
Rabbi Akiva frames it in terms of the respect for his colleague's opinion.
Yeah.
Which is a very high respect, if it should go that far. And that's why I wondered if it was, there's almost I don't say that it's a satirical story at all, but it has an edge to it. It is so extreme that I'm not asking for some, a secret answer that's available. But it
is. I mean, one of the things that's actually fascinating about this, about the founding fathers of Rabbinic Judaism, as we get to it, is, they argued a lot between each other as they were trying to decide the direction of Judaism, but they also tried to have tremendous respect for each other, and they kind of went back and forth, and that sense of respecting the colleagues, we have that in one of the best known stories of Rabbinic Judaism, and then the story of the one Rabbi Eliezer who says, no, the Jewish law is according to me, and all the others are against him. And he says, no, if the Jewish law is according to me, let this tree be uprooted and flies, and God makes the tree uproot, and the others say, no, we still won't listen to you. And he says, well, if the halakha is like me, that the river turn backwards, and his colleagues still say no. And so eventually, and he says, well, if the Jewish law is like me, let the walls of the study hall start to cave in, and the walls of the study hall start to cave in. And then one of the other rabbis says, God, if the rule is like us, let the walls stop caving in. And so the walls stop caving in, they're kind of at an angle. And then the others continues, and finally the Rabbi Joshua, we're going to get to, is one of the really powerful founding fathers. He's not this Rabbi Joshua, different Rabbi Joshua says, but God, you said it's not in heaven. And then at that point, they excommunicate that one rabbi for pushing it so far. And they ask, well, God, what were you doing in heaven? And they ask Elijah, what was God doing in heaven? And God was laughing and saying, my sons, you beat me. My sons, you beat me. That's the kind of saying that the following the authority, following the opinion of the colleagues became almost the most important thing. Having consensus in the community, having consensus among the leaders and the founding fathers became what was most important. So, and often what would happen is you would have one rabbi who would disagree. And then the other rabbis would eventually say, even though you disagree, we're asking you to follow our opinion, because that's the only way we can continue as people, if you let go of your disagreement. And sometimes that happens. We're going to read one of the great stories is of also the Rabbi Joshua that I'm talking about, where there was a disagreement as to when Yom Kippur actually fell among the rabbis. Disputing kind of how do you interpret the new moon and when the moon comes or not. And so what the rabbi who was in charge will say to Rabbi Joshua, I want you to come on the day where I think it's not Yom Kippur, but you think it is Yom Kippur carrying money on you. So that would be the worst offense you could do. But he made him do it just to make him show that he was willing to follow his opinion, and he did it as a show of solidarity. So it's kind of, this is some of the back and forth that they're having. So maybe So Rabbi Akiva saying, I'm going to do this for the opinion of my colleagues is also a way of upholding his colleagues and their opinions, even though, I mean, I'd have to go look it up. I'm not sure what his opinion is about washing your hands before a meal. So it's all, right, the founding fathers are all trying to make their way among very difficult conditions also, obviously. And trying to work out what is the halacha? That's the big question. What is the halacha?
And this was all taking place in Israel, as opposed to Babylonia.
Yeah. But there were some rabbi. So the time frame is that the first few hundred years is a Tannaitic era, and those are the first rabbis who have the most authority. They're the founding fathers, and some of the founding fathers, especially later ones, are either from Babylonia or go to Babylonia. But then after them, when you have the Amoraim, which is the next period of rabbis, that's much more in Babylonia. I mean, you still have Amoraim, you still have rabbis of that era who are living in Israel, especially among the early ones. But then it goes to Babylonia. And so one of the ways you mark it is the early rabbis, they're all named Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Joshua. When you get to later rabbis, their name is no longer Rabbi, it's just Rav. What's the difference? It's that they felt that they lost the direct lineage, right? Back then, how did you become a rabbi? You put your hands on the head. And at a certain point, they lost that. And so it was no longer the same. They lost that direct lineage. So the founding fathers are all called rabbi. And then at a certain point, it's no longer a rabbi because they didn't have that direct constant transmission of the law and the spirit as well.
So was there, said it wasn't like the Akiva or anything like that would ordain you.
Eventually they built huge yeshivas in Babylon, but at this point, I mean, all the rabbis here were non-professionals. So you get at a certain point you get to meet them in their job. Like Rabbi Akiva got lucky because his father-in-law was wealthy. So when his father-in-law recognized how great he was, he gave him money, right? But then some of these are Rabbi Joshua. We get to see there's a blacksmith, and at a certain point, one of the other rabbis visits his home and sees his home and is like, "Wow, you really are poor." His walls are all black, and and so a lot of the early rabbis kind of all worked. Rabbi Akiva, he lived in poverty for the first part of his life, and then the less. But so they all had jobs, and they studied. They studied. Maybe there were small centers, or Yavne, maybe was a place where this is when the temple was destroyed. There was a town where they all went, but it seems like it was more like they learned one-on-one, or they spent time with the master and then with another master, and it was more that type of study rather than a yeshiva. And so when you were ready, that rabbi would put their hands on your head, and then you would be ordained that way. So there was no master's program or even no student loans you had to take out, or
Rabbi, you sort of flipped the question in there. You said, "What is the Holocaust?" What's your sense of that?
but in this particular story,
or generally,
what is the Holocaust?
What is the law, and how, for example, is it different from a rock that's sitting in front of us?
Well, the halakha, they're kind of debating the halakha as they go about and trying different ways. But the halakha is meant to be somewhat flexible, right? It's the oral law, and it's it was written down only because they were worried about it not surviving. So they were developing it at the same time. So the halakha was, And the halakha was as the sages were deciding it, right? That's what it's all about. So the Mishnah always says, well, we have this question. Rabbi Yehuda says one way, another rabbi says one way, and then it says, and the sages said this way. And so what most often it follows the consensus of the sages. So the the halakha is kind of being decided. This is the moment when the founding fathers are deciding the biggest questions of halakha. And then, then it goes, then it goes further down the line. You decide, okay, do we tie our left shoe first or we tie our right shoe first? But here we're deciding we're deciding the bigger questions of halakha. What time do you pray? And what do you pray? And, Shabbat, and, how do you worship God? And how do you tie your tefillin? And all that stuff is being decided. And what does it mean to do Havdalah? What does Havdalah look like? And what are the prayers? And what's the formula for prayers? All that stuff is being decided by these founding fathers as they're going about their lives and doing things.
But what about the halakha that comes straight out of the Torah as a commandment?
So the one that there's no argument about, that's already decided, so there's some stuff that's, but they're living in such a more complicated society. They have to interpret every little bit of halakha. So right in the Torah it says, okay, you shall keep Shabbat and you shall do no work. Okay, but what does that mean? But then you have like a mountain of halachot that have to be then decided based on that. What does it mean you shall do no work? What exactly is work, and what are the boundaries of work? It says you shall not carry outside of your household. Okay, or what is the limit of carrying and not carrying? And then
But these are human discriminations, then, right?
Please say that again.
These are all human discriminations. For example, with the issue of work, these are what humans somehow these aren't concrete like a rock. These are human discriminations that have to be rendered and sort of formalized by us. Now, how is it though that the ultra orthodox somehow have do they have more rigidity about that, or how do they differ as far as seeing these things as human discriminations? I mean, they are human discriminations when you shall not work in the Shabbat, then work has to be defined by human being. So how do the Orthodox sort of arrive at a definition that stops and isn't variant over time?
So that's a wonderful question, and so I mean, even these early rabbis obviously struggled with the fact that they felt very human, and they also felt they realized that they were prophets, right? They felt they were doing this by consensus, and the way they gave themselves authority is they said, well, we are the descendants of prophets. We're the sons of prophets. And the authority was given to us as the leaders of Israel to make this decision. And so, but they really felt anxiety about it, right? Because they felt, we're not prophets. How are we deciding this stuff? We're not the Torah. The Torah was given by God. So they felt anxious about it. You can see that from reading the Talmud and all of these stories. They felt we're very human in a certain way compared to our ancestors. But what the Orthodox feel is that they were, even though they were human, they were conspired by God. And so to the Orthodox, they revered the founding fathers as being one step down from prophecy. And they have this concept of the going down of generations. Every generation after Sinai is further away from divine closeness. So they're a lot closer than we are. So for us to go against one of the opinions of the holy Rabbi Akiva or the holy Rabbi they project divinity onto all of them and onto the Talmud in a very strong way. So for the Orthodox, everything that's happening here is divine theater, and they also believe that they were guided by God. So that even though, and they'll go even further, they'll do something which we consider to be crazy from a conservative Jewish point of law. They think that these stories were actually handed down at Mount Sinai, even though the people in them weren't born yet. Like a strict ultra-Orthodox believes that the Talmud was also handed down at Mount Sinai. And I remember my father tells the story of once going to a wedding of a family friends of ours who became very, very religious. And they were talking and my father was saying, well, you know, okay, maybe the oral law was handed down as a tradition of Mount Sinai, but you can't say these stories verbatim were handed down in the Talmud. It makes no sense. And they're like, no. They were handed down verbatim of Mount Sinai. So the ultra-Orthodox believe that these stories were handed down there and are no less part of the Torah as the written Torah. And that's what conservative Judaism brought, was a historical lens, which like, hey, wait a second, there's a historical lens here, which is, this is less holy than the Torah, and these were human beings trying to work it out, and so we're just like them, we're trying to work it out ourselves. But the Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox, this is just as rigid as you were saying. This is a rock. This is a rock. And if there was a disagreement between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer, and it went the way of Rabbi Akiva 2,000 years ago, then that was decided by divine spirit, and we do not have the shoulders to change the opinion. While conservative Jews will say, hey, they were human beings just like us. We can change, we can maybe go back.
Thanks.
One of the things that I've often felt is, you know, thinking about restrictions on work or what we can do on Shabbat, or even how long services become, especially more traditional, that, you know, the people who made these decisions had a life where maybe time wasn't all that important. But, you know, kind of hearing about how they all worked, they all struggled, doesn't make me think that perhaps they could have made decisions that, you know, services could have been a little shorter. But it makes me feel at least that they had some practical, they were looking at it through something of a practical lens, because they had to think about, how is this going to affect how I live, how I earn my living.
Yeah. I think it's really true, and the services weren't as long back then. I remember we read last time Rabbi Akiva, and it said when Rabbi Akiva would lead the service, when he was leading it for the community, he would shorten it because of it. But when he was davening by himself, it would go on all day. And he would start in one corner and finish in the other corner. So they were very aware of it, and they were doing their best. And at the same time, they also had the competing value of, we have to make Judaism profound enough to survive in exile and to survive, you know. So they kind of were holding both of those, in my mind at least. And they were trying to hold over, but they were trying to make it as livable as possible in their way. And I think one of the things that we have to do in our generations, and we still, even in the conservative movement, I feel we haven't done yet properly, is, okay, taking the principles that they were working with and saying, how do we make it work for our day? You know, because their definition of what is work, I'm not sure that makes any sense in our world, right? But who has a broad enough shoulders to try and redefine that and create, you know, a Jewish law that makes sense in our world, different way. So I want to get to 177, which is the famous story of his death, and I think it's for someone to read 177 is.
Our masters taught, once the wicked Roman government issued a decree forbidding the Jews to study and practice the Torah. Pappus ben Judah came by, and upon finding Rabbi Akiva publicly holding sessions in which he occupied himself with Torah, Pappus asked him, Akiva, are you not afraid of the government? Rabbi Akiva replied, you who are so wise, are in fact a fool. I can explain what I am doing by means of a parable. A fox was walking on a riverbank, and seeing fishes hastening here and there, asked them, from whom are you fleeing? They replied, from the nets and traps set for us by men. So the fox said to them, how would you like to come on dry land so that you and I may live together the way my ancestors lived with yours. They replied, you, the one they call the cleverest of animals, are in fact a fool. If we are fearful in the place where we can stay alive, how much more fearful should we be in a place where we are sure to die? So it is with us. If we are fearful when we sit and study the Torah, of which it is written, quote, for that is thy life and the length of thy days, Deuteronomy 30:20, how much more fearful ought we to be, should we cease the study of the words of Torah? It is related that soon afterwards, Rabbi Akiva was arrested and thrown into prison, and Papas ben Judah was also arrested and put into prison next to him. Rabbi Akiva asked Papas, who brought you here? He replied, happy are you, Rabbi Akiva, that you have been seized for occupying yourself with the Torah. Alas, for Papas, who has been seized for occupying himself with vain things. When Rabbi Akiva was taken out to be executed, it was the hour for the recital of the Shema, and the executioners were combing his flesh with iron combs, while he was lovingly making ready to accept upon himself the yoke of the kingship of heaven. His disciples asked, our teacher, even to such a degree? He replied, all my days have I been troubled by this verse, quote, with all thy soul, Deuteronomy 6:5, which I have interpreted as meaning, even if he takes your soul. But I said, when did I have an occasion to fulfill the precept? Now that I have the occasion, shall I not fulfill it? He prolonged the Shema's concluding word, echad, until he expired. As he finished pronouncing it, a divine voice went forth and proclaimed, happy are you, Akiva, that your soul has departed with the word echad. The ministering angels spoke out bluntly to the Holy One, such Torah and such its reward, he should have been of those that die by thy hand, O Lord, Psalm 17:14. God replied, their portion is in life. Their portion is in life. Just then another divine voice went forth and proclaimed, happy are you, Rabbi Akiva, destined as you are for life in the world to come.
Very powerful midrash, right? So first, we see what profound effect the story has, right? The story of Rabbi Akiva, one of the founding fathers in our religion. First of all, this sets the way Jews are said that we should die, right? You're supposed to die having the Shema on your lips. When we say echad, we elongate the echad, right? That's also supposed to be the halakha. You say echad when you say the Shema. The idea of giving your life to the tradition or to God, right? And I mean, the story before the fox and the fish is really a classic, right? It's saying, right, the fox is saying to the fish, hey, why don't you know it's really hard to be out there in the water. Why don't you come up here? And the fish is saying, well, out there I can't be a fish, and I'd rather die than not be a fish. I need the water more than I need anything. And so it was saying as Jews, we need to study Torah more than just the way a fish needs water. Anybody have anything that they saw here that they found interesting, or something that came to them?
The euphemism for torture, I was kind of shocked by that, where they say that they're combing him with iron, and I've read, you know, I know how Rabbi Akiva was tortured at the end. When Rabbi Akiva was taken out to be executed, it was the hour for the recital of the Shema, and the executioners were combing his flesh with iron combs, while he, Rabbi Akiva, was lovingly making ready to accept upon himself the yoke of the kingship of heaven. That's That's very powerful to me, because even as he's being tortured with those red hot iron combs that they're flaying his flesh with, he's still being himself, right? He's still in prayer, accepting the kingship of heaven. I mean, it almost sounds like it's probably almost sacrilegious to say this, but it sounds like it's a parallel to the way the Christians report the crucifixion of Jesus. I'm seeing parallels there. Maybe this text, it was written before those Christian texts were. I'm not sure, but
It's after, but it's it could be, we could see it as a, you know, we have our suffering masters too, but there were lots of rabbis that were put to death by the Romans in horrible conditions too.
Well, does that mean that he and God, when he's talking about the yoke of the kingship of heaven, what's he talking about? Is he talking about that he will merge with the divine? Is that what he's talking about?
So
That
it's,
he will lose his personal identity and become one with God?
so that part isn't, the echad is, I think, but it's the halacha, right? The Jewish law is that before you say the Shema, when you wake up, you have to take upon yourself the yoke of the kingdom of heaven. The before you say the Shema, you have to, like, in yourself, in your being, say, okay, I am accepting God as my God, basically. That's what you're supposed to think before you say the first pair of the Ve'ahavta. That's what the Ve'ahavta is about. So you take upon yourself the yoke of the kingdom of heaven, and then you say the Ve'ahavta, and then you're supposed to think before you take upon it, before you say the second paragraph, the yoke of the commandments. And that's the halakha. But of course, we worked into the story, and the way the Talmud said is that Rabbi Akiva, right, the way our tradition merges, he went straight to God, right? Where we consider there are like thousands of different kinds of deaths, but the Rabbi Akiva went into the oneness because he said echad as he died, and he went straight, because the way he died, he went straight into God, and he merged with God, essentially. He became one with God, with the oneness. And if you think about his life, right, Rabbi Akiva, he's the one who went into the heavenly orchard and came back. And he's the one who used to pray. He always had that kind of mystical side of him. Maybe the mystical side gave him some of the spiritual power not to feel the pain, or, you know, he was able to put his mind already in the oneness and in God. He was, as he says himself, he was finally fulfilling his highest spiritual aspiration. All his life was learning, what does it mean to give himself to God? And so in this moment, he was fulfilling that, right? And he was in peace because his whole life he was building up to it. I mean, it's a very gruesome way of looking on some way. The other way, it's a very powerful, beautiful way, right? He'd done enough. He was spiritually, right? His whole life, he'd said, we read this last week, right? This too is for the good. This too is for the good. And so he had that place within himself that was beyond, able to transcend this pain and set this very powerful example of martyrdom in the face of, you know, what were they trying to do by forbidding the study of Torah? They were trying to prevent Judaism from surviving, right? They wanted to destroy Judaism. It's also why they said they stopped at this time and other times the practice of circumcision, right? But Rabbi Akiva could see, if we stop spreading Torah, there's no Judaism. So rather to die than that happen.
This is very, it's very interesting. I mean, this text is so rich. There's so many different angles in it. But you used the word transcendent a little while ago, talking about the suffering. I wonder if I mean, do you know, happen to know what rabbis, well, take Maimonides, focusing on God as transcendent and the idea of becoming somehow one with God is in certain level or a certain plane highly problematic because it's a kind of a mystical possibility that I think he would resist. I don't really know enough to even say that, but I wonder if he talked about this story. I happen to know because it's such a in that context, the idea of hoping to be one with God is in tension with God as the transcendent. I would suggest.
Well, but isn't that what everybody's into? I mean, don't you hope to be one with God at some point? Is that so strange?
I didn't say it was strange.
Oh,
I'm talking about Maimonides
yeah,
having a tension.
but you said it was mystical, and mystical means what? Strange or unacceptable?
No, it means mystical as opposed to rational. It doesn't mean it's bad.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Rob.
Well, it is true that the Talmud doesn't say he became one with God. That is more a mystical tradition. What the Talmud says that his death is the exemplary death, or one of, you die and go straight to God, but is there really a difference in going straight to God and becoming one with God? In some, it is in the mystical tradition, it's what's called yichud. Yichud in the mystical tradition means yichud comes from the word echad, which means becoming one. And so the aim in the mystic in Kabbalah is to become one. It is a mystical view, and the rational is to go to God. But in my mind, maybe it's the same thing, on some level. It's just, Rabbi Akiva. But Rabbi Akiva is a mystic. He went to the orchard and he came back, right? So I think Rabbi Akiva is a mystic. So for him, when he says Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, as he's dying, and he makes the Echad one, Hear, O Israel, the Lord is one, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one, and he dies as he says one. In my mind, there's no question he's going into the oneness, whether you're saying whatever the one is. So
It's very helpful.
Right,
It's stories like this that keeps Judaism going. And Rabbi Akiva died in ecstasy, even though he was in such pain.
Beautiful, yeah. It really, you can see how this story, story of a founding father, this is one of the founding fathers of Judaism, how this story becomes a grounding point for Judaism, right? It does, right? It just does, in the martyrs of the Middle Ages and the Crusades and other times, and
Well, it also brings up what the experience of dying is and what the experience of death is. Most people think that the experience of dying is somehow ablating the body. Okay, somehow the senses of the body are being disappeared from you, and you by necessity. I'm not sure why I'm having an echo here, but by necessity, you're going to have something like a mystical experience, because the rationality that we feel in everyday life is derivative of the senses of the body. So when you're dying, the senses of the body are slowly removed, and you're going to experience something that's going to be something different from that. We were talking about last time Rabbi Akiva going to the heavenly place where his three friends were killed or went mad. So Rabbi Akiva had some kind of an ability to, at the same time as he was maintaining his rationality through his senses, essentially, be able to give that up from time to time and to not trouble himself with things that were supersensory. And so his death is an example. I mean, death for most people, if it's slow, especially if you're being tortured, and little by little you're dying, that's a good example for being able to slowly move from the sensory to the supersensory.
I think it's a good place to finish, which is Rabbi Akiva is known as the great innovator. He's the one who interpreted every crown and every word in the Torah. He was able to really give new principles for Judaism to, find ever more layers of meaning in the Torah. He's the one, he had all kinds of theological innovations. He proved you could start studying at 40 years old and still, learn, become a great one. He is quoted as one of the great leaders in making halachic decisions. But he also has this unique place, maybe in some ways, is in creating the spiritual path of Jews in the rabbinic era, which is a path of, both joy, but a little bit of severity, and putting, one of the things that strikes me is he's always going against what the clock, so against the main way of thinking. You would think you're dying by torture, you're just going to die screaming, but no, he's able to transcend that. Or you think horrible things, your donkey dies, say, oh, why did my donkey die? But he tries to find a deeper way of looking at it. And he's always one step further, and he's always trying to take his wisdom and his way of understanding the world and creation one step further. And this is part of what the whole story of Rufus, when he's telling him, it's made out of wood, it's not God. So he's always trying to take a deeper wisdom about life, and that's what we see in so many of his other stories, and of creating this very profound spiritual way of being as Jews, of despite everything that happens to us, trying to keep going and holding on to it, and saying there's something that's greater and more important and more meaningful than just the very first layer of meaning. So next week we're going to start the study. Our next rabbi, Rabban Gamliel, and now we're going to really get further into these founding fathers and all of their stories. I have to run because it's the preschool graduation. Nice to see everybody, and see you next week.